Hello and welcome to the Vulgar Eclectic. Today I wanted to start a video about some short novels that I have really enjoyed in the past. I've had some difficulty narrowing the list down to something manageable, so I'm going to break this into two parts. At this point it looks like it's going to be a total of 26 books, with 13 each video. But that could change, who knows? There are so many good short novels and it's hard to know where to draw the line. I'm not going to be including any short stories, and of course this list does not include any nonfiction pieces. Some of these novels are recognized as classics, and others not quite as much. But I hope you'll find at least something in this list that is of interest to you or that resonates with you, as it does with me. I'm looking forward to hearing from you to see if your tastes are similar, or if some of these books you've read and really disliked. Maybe some of these books are also on your top lists, or maybe some of these books you've read and you can't imagine them being on any sort of a great books list or favorite book list or books to recommend to others list. But we'll see. That's the fun, isn't it? I grouped these together roughly by the length of the novels. It's not hard and fast, and of course many different editions exist for most of these novels, and some of these stories differ from edition to edition in their length, but it's very roughly set up with the shortest books first, proceeding to the longest books. Alright, well, we'll get started with the first one on the list, and that is Call of the Wild by Jack London. It was first serialized in the Saturday Evening Post, and then in 1903 published as a book. It's set in the 1890s Klondike Gold Rush in the Yukon. Jack London had spent almost a year in the Yukon himself and was able to draw a lot of the details and descriptions from his own experiences there. It follows the story of Buck, a dog who has several mean and abusive owners, until finally meeting John Thornton, who is in the Yukon searching for gold. This is a great adventure novel that has a few underlying themes that, in my opinion, make it more than just an adventure novel. It also happens to have one of my favorite passages from all literature. It's just wonderful. Let me read it here. It's just a couple of paragraphs long. To Buck, it was boundless delight, this hunting, fishing, and indefinite wandering through strange places. For weeks at a time they would hold on steadily, day after day, and for weeks upon end they would camp, here and there, the dogs loafing and the men burning holes through frozen muck and gravel, and washing countless pans of dirt by the heat of the fire. Sometimes they went hungry, sometimes they feasted riotously, all according to the abundance of game and the fortune of hunting. Summer arrived, and dogs and men packed on their backs, rafted across blue mountain lakes, and descended or ascended unknown rivers in slender boats whipsawed from the standing forest. The months came and went, and back and forth they twisted through the uncharted vastness, where no men were, and yet where men had been if the lost cabin were true. They went across divides in summer blizzards, shivered under the midnight sun on naked mountains between the timberline and the eternal snows, dropped into summer valleys amid swarming gnats and flies, and in the shadows of glaciers picked strawberries and flowers as ripe and fair as any the Southland could boast. In the fall of the year they penetrated a weird lake country, sad and silent, where wildfowl had been, but where then there was no life nor sign of life, only the blowing of chill winds, the forming of ice in sheltered places, and the melancholy rippling of waves on lonely beaches. Number 2 on my list is Childhood by Leo Tolstoy. Now this is part of a 3-book trilogy, the 3 books being Childhood, Boyhood, and Youth. They are semi-autobiographical novels that Tolstoy wrote when he was pretty young at the beginning of his writing career. The first one, Childhood, was published in 1852. The version I read was translated by Judson Rosengrant. The prose is beautiful, natural, and simple. The story is related through the eyes of the narrator, Nikolenka, who is about 12 years old in the beginning of the book. Tolstoy communicates the inner life of Nikolenka in an immediate, relatable manner, and I was struck with how authentic many of his life's episodes felt. That's one of the things I enjoyed most about the book. It was also interesting reading it after I had read Maxim Gorky's My Childhood. Now, Maxim Gorky's book is an autobiography. It's not fictionalized. The two, both are wonderful. Maxim Gorky's My Childhood is a fantastic book, one of my favorite memoirs. They're really interesting to think about together. Maxim Gorky grew up very poor, incredibly impoverished, and Leo Tolstoy's experiences were quite different than that. He grew up in a very privileged, aristocratic atmosphere, and while Childhood isn't the story exactly of his childhood, it is heavily informed by his experiences. The third book on my list is First Love by Ivan Turgenev. This wonderful little book was published in 1860. I've heard it referred to as the most autobiographical of all of Turgenev's works. It's about a father and a son who are both in love with the same woman. Turgenev is one of my all-time favorite writers, and several of his books I wanted to include, although most of his novels are a little bit too long to be on this list. Reading this book was like being transported in time and place. It brought back memories of my own experiences. The reader so keenly feels those emotions of first love. It is so beautifully written. The next book, the fourth on my list, is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Definitely a much-read classic, and rightfully so. It is a wonderful book. It's almost a parable in a way. Published in 1937, this book follows Lenny and George as they struggle to find work and just a place to be in the world. Of Mice and Men is, in my mind, very closely connected to the Odyssey by Homer, which at first might sound odd, but I think at their heart both books are about home. They are about, in Odysseus' case, trying to return home. And in the case of Lenny and George and some of the other characters in the book, it is about trying to find a home or create a home. In that sense, both make me think of the term nostalgia, especially in the sense of the Greek root words, which mean roughly homecoming and pain. So it's this longing for home. And I think that's a dominant theme in both of those books. On a side note, George and Lenny remind me of Fafford and the Grey Mouser a little bit. All right, I think we're on the fifth book now, which is One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich by Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. This book was published in 1962 in a Soviet literary magazine called Novy Mir, or New World. Solzhenitsyn was imprisoned from 1945 to 1953 for some comments that he made in letters about the way Stalin was handling the war. And much of this story is drawn from his experiences in the prison system in Russia at that time. The whole book is just a single day in the life of a prisoner in a Soviet labor camp. This book conveys the immediate realities of a prisoner living in such conditions. The next book, A Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs, is considered a foundational text in the genre of planetary romance. It first reached the reading public in a serialized form in the pulp magazine All Story Magazine in 1912. Soon thereafter, it was published as a book and was the first book of many in the Barsoom novels. The story begins on Earth, but soon the action switches to the surface of Mars. John Carter, a Virginian gentleman, is transported mysteriously to the Red Planet, where he meets memorable characters like Deja Thoris, Tars Tarkas, and Sola. This is a wild, fun, very fast-paced adventure, as are all of the Barsoom novels and pretty much everything I've ever read by Edgar Rice Burroughs. For some reason, the phrase green sward is something that comes to mind when I think of A Princess of Mars and the Barsoom novels and Edgar Rice Burroughs' writing in general, I suppose. A Princess of Mars is a great start to a wonderful series. For the seventh book, we're no longer on a distant planet, but an internment camp in Utah during World War II. This novel is When the Emperor Was Divine by Julie Otsuka, and it was published in 2002. This book tells the story of a Japanese-American family from California that is sent to an internment camp in Utah for 3 years. The unnamed family consists of a mother, father, and their daughter and son. And the perspective of the narrative changes throughout the story as each family member relates a different part of their story. The clean, simple prose tells a humane story from a period of history that is important to remember. All right, I believe we're on the 8th book now, and that is The Passion by Jeanette Winterson, published in 1987. This novel takes place during the Napoleonic Wars, and it follows two soldiers who desert the French army, and they are befriended by a woman of ill repute, and it is a very, very good story following these characters. My memory of this book is an impression of something lush and sensual, and I think this could describe the prose as well. I haven't yet read another book by Jeanette Winterson, although I had a very strong response to The Passion, and it makes me want to check out another one of her novels. The 9th book is Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton, another classic on the list, published in 1911. It takes place in Massachusetts, and it's a framed story, a story within a story, in which we learn about, quote, the most striking figure in Starkfield, end quote. It tells the story of Ethan and his wife Zena and Zena's cousin Maddie, and the tragic relationship between the three. The next novel is another classic, although probably a little bit less known than in general than some of the others on this list. It is titled A Hero of Our Time by Mikhail Lermontov, and it was published in 1840. It's a quintessential example of the idea of the superfluous man, which was an idea that was pretty popular in literature in the 19th century. Well-known examples of this idea being explored in literature of the time include Childe Harold's Pilgrimage by Byron, Rudin by Turgenev, and, as I mentioned, A Hero of Our Time by Lermontov. This novel is regarded as very influential in the development of fiction in Russia, and it is a precursor to a lot of the more famous, more well-known Russian writers that came after. I really enjoyed this, so much so that I ended up reading a biography about Lermontov that was really excellent. I highly recommend A Hero of Our Time and any other work you can find by Lermontov. His narrative poem, The Demon, is fantastic as well. The next book is a more contemporary novel, Was Amelia Earhart by Jane Mendelsohn, published in 1996. It's a fictional account of what happened to the pilot Amelia Earhart and her navigator Fred Noonan after they disappeared off the coast of New Guinea in 1937. It's very beautiful, poetic, ethereal writing, and it was a real pleasure to read. Another book with elegant prose is Nightwings by Robert Silverberg. This is a science fiction novel, somewhat in the vein of The Dying Earth tradition by Jack Vance. This is set in the far future, and Silverberg writes with lyrical prose. His use of language creates an evanescent world that has a dreamlike quality and reminds me at times of the world Gene Wolfe creates in Shadow of the Torturer. Nightwings is really the first in a trilogy of novellas, the next two being Paris Way and To Jerusalem. The first two were published in 1968 and the third one in 1969, and the three were published altogether in a novel form in 1969. And now we are on to the last novel in this list, or in this half of this list, number 13, which is True Grit by Charles Portis, a Western published in 1968. It's told in the voice of the character Maddie Ross, and this is the best thing about the book. Her voice is very endearing. She's on a quest to avenge her father's murder, which is a very archetypal storyline in the Western genre. Maddie is just such a great character, and her personality is so much fun. All right, that wraps up my list of the first half of 26 short novels I would highly recommend, and that I have personally enjoyed very much. I went through them pretty quickly in order to try to make this video a manageable length. If you have anything to say about any of these novels, please do so. I'd love to hear about it. Have you read them? Do you want to read them? Are they on your TBR? Maybe you've read one and really disliked it, or maybe you read one and really loved it. Share your thoughts. Let me know what you think, and I will see you in the second half of this video. Thanks a lot, and happy reading.